Welcome back to True Cyber Crimes. I'm Chris here, and I'm with Nick for episode 4 of our 5-part series, Inside the Mind of a Ransomware Operator. Today we're tackling perhaps the most difficult aspect of our series, the human costs of ransomware attacks. It's not just about data and dollars, it's about real people whose lives are turned upside down.
Absolutely. And what makes this topic even more complex is understanding how the operators justify their actions to themselves. We're dealing with people who cause immense suffering, yet many sleep soundly at night. I don't understand how that's possible personally.
And as we sat back and talk about these, they don't always feel real. They just don't. But here's a case that kind of drove it home for me. In September of 2020, the University Hospital Dusseldorf in Germany was hit by a ransomware attack. We've talked about healthcare getting hit before. The attack was so severe that the emergency room patients had to be rerouted to other hospitals. One woman who needed urgent care had to travel an additional hour to reach help, and she didn't make it.
Oh, yeah, that case it gives me chills when you see the actual impact on humans, right? It makes it a lot more real. Um, and here we have what might be the first documented ransomware related death. But here's what's fascinating from a psychological standpoint is when the attackers learned that they had hit a hospital instead of their intended target, which was Heinrich Heine University, they actually provided the decryption key for free,
That's an unexpected outcome.
right? It suggests that at some level, there's a moral boundary, I guess, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Um, but here's the kicker. In this case, it was too late. The damage was done. This woman had lost her life. A family was, impacted forever. Just because they had to reroute patients because of the cyber attack. So even when operators show what they consider to be mercy, the human cost is, irreversible a lot of the time.
Yeah. And that really illustrates something I've been thinking about. These attackers often operate under a set of really twisted ethics. I mean, that's a pretty good example of it there. They tell themselves, "Hey, we don't attack hospitals, or we only go after big corporations that can afford it." But the reality is far messier.
Yeah, I mean, it's like a drone strike. Well, we were aiming for the
Yeah,
terrorists, but we got the
collateral
neighborhood next
damage.
door, and it's
Yeah.
kind of the same thing. I've spent hours analyzing, discussions and web forums and things like that, where these operators will ultimately talk among themselves. And it's been reported that there's this recurring theme of victim blaming. Things like if they can't afford proper security, they deserve what they get, or we're just exposing their weaknesses. Really just kind of making up in their mind a justification for this.
And in any criminal, that's a classic psychological defense mechanism, isn't it? I mean, shift blaming to avoid accountability. Hey, that's really not I had nothing to do with that part of it.
Yeah, yeah, it's textbook compartmentalization and something we've talked about a little bit before. They separate their actions from their consequences, and I remember reading on one post on a forum where there was an operator who was bragging about their like $4.5 million payout from a healthcare system, and someone asked about impact to patients, and the response was, "Well, that's not my department. I just do the technical work."
Not my department. That's like a bomb maker saying they're not responsible for the explosion. Hey, man, I just built the device.
Yeah.
That's not my gig.
And speaking of healthcare, the numbers are staggering. According to recent studies, ransomware attacks on healthcare facilities have increased patient mortality rates by up to 0.36 percentage points in the years following an attack. While that sounds small, it's less than a percent. We're talking about thousands of additional deaths every year.
And those, 0.3%, it's just 0.3%, but those aren't statistics to an affected family. Each number represents somebody's parent, spouse, child. But how do the operators rationalize this when they must know the consequences when they attack a healthcare system?
I mean, many don't want to know. It's willful ignorance. I've seen where specifically these individuals, these operators will avoid targeting certain types of organizations, and we read about this in the news. Not out of moral concern, mind you, but because they don't want to deal with the complexity of that fallout. In one case, it was posted in a forum that, quote, hospitals are too messy, stick to manufacturing and retail.
Too messy, as if human suffering is just another inconvenience to their business model.
Right. But here's where it gets like really psychological. Some operators actually convince themselves that they're providing a service. In some posts I've seen where they'll frame themselves as, quote, security consultants, and are simply demonstrating vulnerabilities as if they're white hackers. One operator wrote, "We're showing them their weaknesses. If anything, we're doing them a favor." Yeah, I take a little issue with that, but
So disturbing, so disturbing. And that's, similar to, we had the conversation about the Colonial Pipeline attack in 2021. DarkSide, the group responsible, actually issued a public statement saying they weren't trying to cause societal problems. They're just after money. So, hey, I'm sorry. Nice.
yeah, the Colonial Pipeline case, it's a perfect example of cognitive dissonance, and we talked through this a little bit in I think our last episode. They shut down the largest fuel pipeline in the U.S., causing panic buying and gas shortages, and impacts everywhere. But they acted surprised by the chaos that we saw in society as a result of that.
It's pretty easy to track back the cost, that the deaths that are an effect in the healthcare system. But if you could like branch out from like the Colonial Pipeline, people who didn't make the medical appointments or what have you, or couldn't do this or couldn't do that, I wonder what the death toll is to that. And maybe not just death toll, but the absolute cost that you can't even tie back to it. It's just incredible. And with that, the ripple effects were incredible. There was a story of someone's elderly father who couldn't get to his dialysis appointment because of the gas shortage. But the operators, it was probably just another payday.
And that's the thing, the distance factor, and we see this in everything these days. When you're sitting behind a computer screen, potentially even in another country,
Yeah.
those victims become very abstract. They don't seem real. It's just a headline. And there's research that shows that people are more likely to cause harm when they can't see the immediate consequences of their actions.
Yeah, and you said earlier, it's like drone warfare in a way. The physical and the emotional distance makes it easier to pull the trigger and drop the bomb.
Exactly. Yeah. But not all of the operators in this case maintain this kind of distance. There's been documented cases where attackers have had what you might call like a crisis of conscience. In 2021, the Babuk ransomware group announced that they were shutting down their operation, citing concerns about the attention they were attracting rather, after attacking Washington, D.C. Police department.
So they shut down due to their conscience. That's kind of a new one.
Yeah, well, they claimed it was about heat from law enforcement, but some forum discussions suggest internal disagreement about targets. One leaked conversation even showed members arguing about whether attacking law enforcement crossed the line. So, maybe it was dissent in amongst the ranks that fracture them.
That's interesting. So even within the groups, there are moral debates on what they're doing.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes more often it's probably business strategy than morals or ethics. But
Yeah.
I've seen the debate, whether attacking schools is worth the negative publicity, not because they care about children's education, but because it makes law enforcement more aggressive. And there is the adage, all, what is it? Any publicity is good publicity, but
Yeah,
maybe not when it leads to regulation
true.
and law.
Yeah, and that's somehow even more chilling, reducing human suffering to a cost benefit analysis report. So
I hate to be I'm not usually the pessimist, but isn't that a lot of business
It is. Oh yeah,
anymore?
you're right. Yeah,
I
take like what's the lowest? Yeah, you're right. The lowest
yeah,
part of human
I mean,
suffering that we can do.
call a spade a spade. It's kind of the world we live in, sadly.
Yeah.
But the psychological toll extends beyond immediate victims too, right? There's collateral damage. Some IT professionals who have lived through ransomware attacks will describe, PTSD or symptoms similar to that. There's a story of a CIO who couldn't sleep for months after an attack. They're constantly checking their systems, their email, making sure there wasn't an alert, convinced that it would happen again. And frankly, they're probably rightly so.
Right, and it's gonna and the paranoia must be overwhelming. You're supposed to be the protector of your organization's digital assets, and suddenly you feel completely vulnerable.
And operators know this, and they prey on that. So some groups are specifically using psychological pressure tactics. They'll leak small amounts of sensitive data to kind of preview, give you a taste, to increase the anxiety and pressure victims into paying quickly.
It's, I mean, it's no different. It's psychological warfare, really.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a disturbing trend too that I've noticed, and some of these operators or attackers are becoming a lot more sophisticated about understanding their victim's psychology. So we kind of have HR departments that'll come to us and talk about the people and feelings and psychology of business and stuff like that. Here they are, these hackers and operators are researching companies they target, looking for emotional pressure points and things like that. So
Do you have any examples on that? I mean, that just kind of hits it home if you can pull up an example.
yeah, there's a case where attackers targeted a children's hospital. I mean, children's hospital.
How much lower can
um
you get in the in the
yeah,
dirtbag zone?
not much. In fact, I don't know that you can. And they specifically mentioned in the ransom note that they had access to patient records of terminally ill children. In this case, they weren't just threatening data loss; they were weaponizing that emotional distress.
There's a
Sick.
a special place in hell for them.
Yep.
That's just evil that doesn't even feel like a strong enough word.
No. But these same operators, might post in their forums about loving their own families, celebrating holidays, otherwise living what we would kind of call a normal life. And that's where I just think that compartmentalization that they're capable of is pretty extraordinary,
So
sadly.
are they sociopaths? Are they just, regular people like you and I? Well, not like you and I, but are they regular people? Because I
Boy,
sure
yeah.
wouldn't do that, who've just found a way to disconnect from the consequences of what they're doing.
Yeah, I think it's the big question, and there's been research that suggests it's more of the latter. They're just disconnecting. A lot of these probably as with many criminals started with smaller cybercrime, credit card fraud, identity theft, things like that, and little by little, it's a slippery slope, and they escalated. Each of these little infractions making it easier to justify the next.
All right. Well, think you hit the nail on the head. It's a slippery slope of moral compromise.
Yeah, exactly. And I think, as with everything in life, money becomes kind of intoxicating, and when you're able to make millions from behind your keyboard,
Yeah.
it, I imagine it becomes easy to rationalize almost anything. Well, it's the influencer society
Yeah. Yeah. Right. So yeah. Yeah.
in a different way.
Well, before we wrap up, I wanted to circle back to something you mentioned earlier about operators who show remorse. Are there cases where attackers have genuinely tried to make amends?
There's a few documented cases. I think in 2020, there was a group called Maze. They returned stolen data to a cancer treatment center without demanding payment
That's
after
nice.
realizing, yeah, I mean, there's maybe a little bit of a heart there. After once they realized that they were impacting that cancer patient care.
Yeah.
But that's more the exception, not the rule, right?
Sure, sure. 1 in 1,000. The odds really put the moral landscape of ransomware into perspective.
Yeah, they do. And it's why understanding this mindset is I think so important. We're not dealing with cartoon villains. I don't have my mustache anymore, twirling my mustache. We're dealing with people who have found ways to justify causing tremendous suffering, just for the simplicity of financial gain.
Some of them do sound like Boris and Natasha, though, but I don't know if I'm racially profiling. I apologize for that.
I think maybe you're just showing your age more than anything else.
I am, for those people who don't know who that is, and that's more or less, scarier than dealing with pure evil, isn't it? Dealing with, you know, those people who are just on the outside, kind of looking in. They don't really feel what they're doing is so wrong because they've disengaged from it.
Yeah, I think so. If these are just people who lost their way, maybe they can find it again. Maybe they have that change of heart. But it also means anyone could potentially make similar choices given the right circumstances or the wrong influences and pressures.
And that's a sobering thought to end on. And next episode, we're going to wrap up this series by exploring how ransomware is evolving and what the future might hold for digital extortion.
Yeah, until then, remember, cybersecurity isn't just about protecting data, it's about protecting lives, our livelihoods, and ultimately the trust that holds our digital society, kind of together and functioning.
So, all right, folks, let's stay vigilant, stay informed, and most importantly, stay human in the world that sometimes makes it easy to forget the person on the other side of the screen. Thanks for listening to True Cybercrimes. We'll see you next time. Thanks, Nick.
See you, Chris.